du meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe.
If there is one thing Hitler knew how to do, it's inspire fanatical loyalty. This loyalty would lead Joachim von Ribbentrop to a brutal execution in prison. Alfred Rosenberg, who remained loyal to the end, also got what he deserved after being convicted for war crimes. Let's check out their stories. Joachim von Ribbentrop. Born on April 30th, 1893, in Wesel, Germany, Ribbentrop was a man who literally bought his way into nobility, adopting the von prefix in 1925 through an aunt's influence, a fact that would later earn him bitter mockery from his Nazi colleagues. The man who would become Hitler's foreign minister was initially an unlikely candidate for Nazi leadership. His early life took him across continents, spending time in Switzerland, France, and Canada, where he worked in banking and journalism before serving in World War I and earning the Iron Cross. When Ribbentrop joined the Nazi Party in 1932 after meeting Hitler in 1928, he brought with him something the movement desperately needed: international experience and social connections. But what truly set him apart was his sycophantic devotion to Hitler, a trait that would serve him well in the Nazi hierarchy but ultimately seal his doom. As foreign minister from 1938 to 1945, Ribbentrop became the diplomatic face of Nazi aggression. His signature achievement, if it can be called that, was negotiating the 1939 Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with the Soviet Union, including secret protocols partitioning Eastern Europe. But Ribbentrop's crimes extended far beyond enabling aggressive war. He became deeply complicit in the Holocaust, systematically working to ensure that Nazi genocide could proceed without international interference. He ordered the deportation of Jews from Axis countries like Romania, Slovakia, Croatia, France, Hungary, Italy, and the Balkans, resulting in hundreds of thousands sent to extermination camps. His cold, bureaucratic efficiency in facilitating murder was demonstrated when he instructed the execution of 8,000 Serbian Jews in 1941 and supported the Madagascar Plan for Jewish deportation. When the war ended, Ribbentrop's fall from grace was swift and complete. At Nuremberg, he faced the full weight of justice, convicted on all 4 counts: crimes against peace, war of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Despite his attempts to claim deception by Hitler, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Interestingly, he scored 129 on an IQ test during his imprisonment, proving that his crimes weren't the result of intellectual limitation, but of moral bankruptcy. On the morning of October 16, 1946, justice finally caught up with the man who had helped plunge the world into war. His execution, however, was a final indignity. The hanging was botched, taking 14 minutes to complete. Even in death, Ribbentrop maintained his delusions, his last words being a plea for German unity and world peace, ironic final sentiments from a man who had dedicated his career to division and war. While Ribbentrop came to Nazism as an opportunistic outsider seeking social advancement, our next figure represents a different path to complicity, that of the professional military officer whose sense of duty was perverted into unquestioning obedience to evil. Wilhelm Keitel. Born on September 22, 1882, in Helmscherode, Germany, Keitel represented the Prussian military tradition at its most disciplined and most dangerous. Unlike many of his Nazi colleagues who came from political backgrounds, Keitel was a soldier through and through. He initially wanted to farm, but pursued a military career, joining the Prussian army in 1901 and quickly establishing himself as a competent officer. The tragedy of Keitel's story lies in how this competent, disciplined soldier became the perfect enabler for Hitler's criminal orders. As chief of the OKW, Armed Forces High Command, from 1938 to 1945, Keitel found himself in a position where his military training in following orders became a pathway to complicity in mass murder. Keitel's military expertise was crucial in planning some of Nazi Germany's most devastating campaigns, including Operation Barbarossa, the 1941 invasion of the Soviet Union. But it was his role in legitimizing and disseminating criminal orders that truly sealed his fate. The orders that bear his signature read like a catalogue of war crimes: the 1941 Commissar Order mandating the execution of Soviet political officers, the Night and Fog Decree for disappearing opponents, the Commando Order calling for killing captured Allied special forces, and reprisal directives authorizing the execution of 100 civilians for every German soldier killed. At Nuremberg, Keitel's defense strategy revealed both his military mindset and its fundamental flaw: his claim of following superior orders, a defense that military tribunals had been rejecting since at least World War I, showed how completely he had subordinated his moral judgment to military hierarchy. Convicted on all 4 counts at Nuremberg for these orders and his full knowledge of atrocities, his superior order's defense was rejected. To his credit, Keitel showed more remorse than many of his co-defendants. He expressed regret in his final statement and received communion before his execution. His last words invoked God's mercy, suggesting that in his final moments he recognized the magnitude of what he had enabled. Keitel's participation in the post-July 20th, 1944 proceedings adds another dark chapter to his story. He sat on the Court of Honor after the assassination attempt against Hitler, leading to many officers' executions, showing how he used his military authority to eliminate those who had found the courage to resist that he himself had never mustered. Wilhelm Keitel's execution on October 16, 1946, marked the end of a man who embodied the dangerous potential of unquestioning obedience to authority, even when that authority commands evil. Where Keitel represented military obedience transformed into criminal compliance, our next condemned man embodied something far more sinister: the intelligent, calculating overseer who personally orchestrated terror with cold efficiency. Ernst Kaltenbrunner. Ernst Kaltenbrunner's imposing physical presence, standing 6'4", with facial scars that made him intimidating even to Heinrich Himmler, perfectly matched his role as one of the most feared men in Nazi Germany. Born on October 4, 1903, in Riedim-Innkreis, Austria, Kaltenbrunner grew up in an environment that would shape his worldview in the most dangerous ways. However, beneath this veneer of respectability lay a man drawn to extremism. He joined the Nazi Party in 1930 and the SS in 1931, relatively early in both organizations' development. His legal training and imposing personality quickly marked him for leadership, and by 1935 he had become a leader in the Austrian SS. Kaltenbrunner's rise to ultimate power came through tragedy and opportunity. When Reinhard Heydrich was assassinated in 1942, Kaltenbrunner inherited his position and exceeded even his predecessor's brutality. As RSHA, Reich Security Main Office chief from 1943 to 1945, he oversaw the Gestapo, SD, Security Service, Kripo, Criminal Police, and Einsatzgruppen, essentially controlling the entire apparatus of Nazi terror and surveillance. His additional roles expanded his influence even further. He led Interpol from 1943-1945, perverting international police cooperation into a tool of Nazi persecution, and served as commander-in-chief of southern Germany in 1945 as the Reich crumbled around him. What made Kaltenbrunner particularly dangerous was how he intensified the Holocaust during his tenure. Unlike some Nazi officials who maintained plausible deniability, Kaltenbrunner was directly and personally involved in genocide. He attended a 1940 meeting on gassing Jews, making him an early participant in planning systematic murder. The scope of Kaltenbrunner's crimes extended across Nazi-occupied Europe. He ordered the eradication of Italian Jews, leading to Auschwitz deportations, and played a crucial role in facilitating Hungary's deportation of 750,000 Jews in 1944, one of the Holocaust's most concentrated and deadly operations. His 1945 decree allowing police to shoot disloyal individuals without trial showed how he used his final months in power to eliminate any remaining constraints on state violence. When the war ended, Kaltenbrunner's attempts to escape justice proved futile. He was arrested in May 1945 in an Alpine cabin, captured like a common fugitive rather than the powerful security chief he had once been. Even decades after his death, Kaltenbrunner's legacy of terror continues to surface. His discarded security seal was found in a lake in 2001. While Kaltenbrunner wielded terror through direct administrative control of the SS apparatus, our next figure approached evil from an entirely different angle, that of the intellectual who provided pseudo-scholarly justification for genocide, proving that education without morality can become the most dangerous weapon of all. Alfred Rosenberg. Born on January 12, 1893, in Reval, now Tallinn, Estonia, to a Baltic German family, Rosenberg's early life was marked by academic achievement and cultural displacement. He studied architecture in Riga and earned a PhD in Moscow in 1917, demonstrating intellectual capability that should have been used to build rather than destroy. The Russian Revolution disrupted his life, leading him to emigrate to Germany in 1919, where his resentment would find its most toxic expression. What made Rosenberg particularly dangerous dangerous was his early commitment to Nazi ideology. He joined the Nazi Party even before Hitler became its dominant figure, marking him as one of the movement's founding intellectual figures. His academic background and intellectual pretensions gave him credibility that more obviously thuggish Nazi leaders lacked. He was influenced by racial theorists like Houston Stewart Chamberlain, absorbing and then amplifying ideas about racial superiority that would ultimately justify mass murder. Rosenberg's most infamous contribution to Nazi ideology was his book, The Myth of the 20th Century, published in 1930. This pseudo-intellectual tome promoted Aryan supremacy and anti-Semitism with the veneer of scholarly analysis, providing intellectual cover for hatred and violence. The book's influence cannot be overstated. It helped transform crude prejudice into systematic ideology, giving Nazi supporters a framework for understanding their hatred as intellectually justified. His official positions within the Nazi hierarchy reflected his role as chief ideologist. He led the NSDAP Office of Foreign Affairs from 1933-1945, became Reichsleiter in 1933, headed Amt Rosenberg for cultural policy, and directed the ERR, Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, for looting art from Jews. This last role was particularly revealing. Rosenberg used his position to systematically plunder Jewish cultural treasures, including works from families like the Rothschilds, combining ideology with theft. As Reich Minister for occupied Eastern Territories from 1941-1945, Rosenberg moved from theorizing about racial superiority to implementing it as policy. He administered Soviet lands via Reichskommissariats, advocating the exploitation of Slavs as Untermenschen, subhumans. At Nuremberg, Rosenberg was convicted on all 4 counts for planning invasions of Norway and the USSR and overseeing Eastern atrocities. He wrote memoirs during the trial, apparently still believing his actions could be justified or explained away. His refusal of last rites, declaring himself an atheist, was consistent with his replacement of traditional moral frameworks with his own twisted ideology. Where Rosenberg provided the ideological framework for Nazi crimes through pseudo-intellectual theory, our next condemned man took a different approach to evil, transforming legal expertise into a tool for implementing systematic murder, showing how the law itself can be perverted to serve genocide. Hans Frank. Born on May 23, 1900, in Karlsruhe, Germany, Frank's early life suggested a future in legitimate legal service. He studied law and economics in Munich and Kiel, earning his Dr. Jur. In 1924, after brief service in World War I, Frank's path to infamy began with his early commitment to Nazi ideology. He joined the DAP, the Nazi Party's precursor, in 1919 and participated in the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923, marking him as one of Hitler's earliest and most loyal supporters. His legal expertise made him invaluable to the movement. He became Hitler's personal lawyer, handling 2,400 cases, using his professional skills to protect and advance Nazi interests. But it was Frank's appointment as Governor General of occupied Poland that transformed him from legal enabler to direct perpetrator of genocide. From 1939-1945, he oversaw a 90,000 square kilometer territory that became one of the Holocaust's primary killing fields. Under his administration, 4 major extermination camps operated: Belzec, Treblinka, Majdanek, and Sobibor, where over 4 million people died. Frank's rule was marked by such brutality that even attempts on his life seemed justified. He survived a 1944 assassination attempt, but his response revealed his true character. He ordered the execution of 100 Polish hostages in retaliation, demonstrating how he used collective punishment to terrorize the population he controlled. At Nuremberg, Frank underwent what appeared to be genuine conversion, though whether it was spiritual awakening or strategic calculation remains debated. He converted to Catholicism, confessed partial guilt, citing Rudolf Höss's testimony, and surrendered his personal diaries as evidence. These diaries provided prosecutors with invaluable documentation of Nazi crimes, written in Frank's own hand. Frank and Albert Speer were noted as the only defendants showing genuine remorse, though Frank's remorse was complicated by his tendency to accuse the Allies of hypocrisy. Even in apparent repentance, he couldn't fully accept responsibility without deflecting blame elsewhere. He was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity, notably not of crimes against peace, reflecting the tribunal's recognition that his primary role was implementing rather than planning aggressive war. His execution by hanging on October 16, 1946, marked the end of a man who had used legal training to facilitate some of history's worst atrocities. While Frank used his legal background to implement genocide in occupied Poland through direct administrative control, our next figure took a different but equally destructive approach, using bureaucratic competence to systematically dismantle the very legal framework that should have protected human rights. Wilhelm Frick. Born on March 12, 1877, in Alsenz, Germany, Frick's early life followed a predictable path towards civil service. He initially studied philology before switching to law, earning his doctorate in 1901 and joining Bavarian civil service in 1903 as a Munich police attorney. His career trajectory suggested a life of mundane administrative competence, exactly the type of background that made him so dangerous when that competence was applied to implementing Nazi ideology. Frick's transformation from civil servant to Nazi enabler began with his early exposure to extremist politics. He sympathized with the Freikorps paramilitary units and met Hitler through his police work, creating connections that would prove fateful for millions of people. He joined the Nazi Party in 1923 and participated in the Beer Hall Putsch, receiving only a suspended sentence that allowed him to continue his career. His political ascent was rapid once the Nazis gained power. Elected to the Reichstag in 1924, he became Thuringia's first Nazi minister from 1930-1931, using the position to purge non-Nazi officials. As Reich Interior Minister from 1933-1943, Frick became the primary architect of Nazi Germany's transformation from a constitutional republic to a totalitarian dictatorship. His legal training and administrative experience made him uniquely qualified to dismantle democratic institutions while maintaining a veneer of legality. The laws he crafted were masterpieces of legal destruction, systematically eliminating protections for minorities, political opponents, and ultimately human rights themselves. The scope of Frick's legislative destruction is staggering. He drafted the Reichstag Fire Decree, which suspended civil liberties, the Enabling Act, which gave Hitler dictatorial powers, and the Nuremberg Laws, which stripped Jewish citizens of their citizenship and legal protections. Each of these laws was carefully crafted to appear legal while enabling unprecedented oppression. Perhaps most chilling was Frick's role in legalizing murder through laws enabling euthanasia, Action T4, and forced sterilizations. His bureaucratic approach to genocide began with the systematic killing of disabled individuals, creating the administrative and psychological framework that would later be applied to the Holocaust. Frick's administrative reforms extended beyond individual laws to restructure the entire German governmental system. He centralized power, controlled police forces until Heinrich Himmler's 1936 takeover, and supported rearmament and the Anschluss with Austria. Frick's execution at 2:05 a.m. on October 16, 1946, marked the end of a man whose greatest crime was using bureaucratic competence to serve genocidal ideology. Where Frick operated behind the scenes, crafting the legal infrastructure for Nazi oppression, our next condemned man took a far more public and visceral approach to spreading hatred, transforming crude anti-Semitism into systematic propaganda that helped create the psychological conditions for genocide. Julius Streicher. Born on February 12, 1885 in Fleinhausen, Germany, Streicher's early life seemed to destine him for a career in education rather than hatred. He followed his father's path as a schoolteacher and served in World War I, earning Iron Crosses and a commission. His military service demonstrated competence and bravery, traits that made his later career in promoting hatred all the more disturbing. The transformation from educator to hatemonger began in the chaotic aftermath of World War I. Post-war, he joined anti-Semitic groups and affiliated with the Nazis in 1922, relatively early in the party's development. Unlike many Nazi leaders who came to anti-Semitism through political opportunism, Streicher seemed genuinely obsessed with promoting hatred of Jews, making it his life's mission. Streicher's primary weapon was his newspaper, Der Stürmer, the Striker. As publisher from 1923-1945, the publication reached a peak circulation of 600,000, making it one of Nazi Germany's most widely read propaganda organs. The newspaper wasn't merely biased news reporting, it was systematic psychological warfare designed to dehumanize an entire people. The content of Der Stürmer went beyond even typical Nazi propaganda in its viciousness. Streicher specialized in caricatures that dehumanized Jews, accusations of ritual murder, and children's books like Der Giftpilz, The Poisonous Mushroom, published in 1938. This last item was particularly insidious. Streicher was literally poisoning children's minds with hatred, ensuring that the next generation would be psychologically prepared for genocide. As Gauleiter of Franconia from 1929 to 1940, Streicher had governmental power to implement his hatred as policy. He organized the 1933 Jewish boycott, contributed to drafting the Nuremberg Laws, and personally destroyed Nuremberg synagogue during Kristallnacht in 1938. These weren't just symbolic acts, they were practical steps in the systematic exclusion and persecution that would eventually lead to mass murder. During the trial, Streicher remained unrepentant, claiming judge bias and citing Jewish texts in an attempt to justify justify his propaganda campaign. Even facing execution, he couldn't abandon the hatred that had defined his life and career. His final moments revealed his character completely. Executed by hanging, he shouted "Heil Hitler" and "Purimfest," the latter reference being particularly revealing, as Purim is a Jewish holiday celebrating survival against persecution. Even in death, Streicher was making anti-Semitic references, demonstrating that his hatred was so deep it persisted to his final breath. While Streicher used inflammatory propaganda to poison minds against Jews, our next figure took a more methodical approach to human exploitation, organizing the systematic enslavement of millions across occupied Europe with the cold efficiency of an industrial manager. Fritz Sauckel. Born on October 27, 1894, in Haßfurt, Germany, Sauckel's early life was marked by working-class origins and international experience that should have given him empathy for ordinary workers. He left school at 15 to join the Merchant Marine and was interned in France during World War I from 1914-1919. After the war, Sauckel studied engineering but was expelled for his political activities, suggesting that his commitment to Nazi ideology was strong enough to sacrifice his education. He joined the Nazi Party in 1923, relatively early in the movement's development, and his combination of working-class credibility and organizational ability quickly marked him for leadership. As Gauleiter of Thuringia from 1927 to 1945 and Reichsstatthalter from 1933-1945, Sauckel demonstrated the administrative competence that would make him so effective and so dangerous in his later role. His regional leadership experience gave him understanding of how to organize large-scale operations and coordinate between different governmental agencies. But it was Sauckel's appointment as General Plenipotentiary for Labor Deployment in 1942 that transformed him from a regional Nazi official into one of history's greatest exploiters of human labor. The scale of his operation was staggering. He was responsible for deporting approximately 5 million forced laborers from occupied territories, making him the architect of what was essentially continental-scale slavery. What made Sauckel's crimes particularly damning was the systematic deception involved in his recruitment methods. Only about 200,000 of these workers were truly voluntary. The rest were obtained through brutal methods like press ganging in Poland and the Soviet Union. The geographic scope of Sauckel's operations encompassed virtually all of Nazi-occupied Europe, from French factories to Polish farms, from Norwegian ports to Ukrainian villages. His agents operated a continent-wide system of human trafficking that separated millions of people from their families, their communities, and their basic human dignity. He was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity, with the tribunal recognizing that his forced labor system constituted both individual crimes against specific victims and broader crimes against human civilization itself. Sauckel's personal life provided a stark contrast to his professional role in destroying other families. He was married with 10 children and even received a 250,000 Reichsmark birthday award in 1944, showing how the Nazi system rewarded those who were most effective at implementing its criminal policies. His execution by hanging on October 16, 1946, marked the end of a man who had reduced millions of human beings to mere economic inputs in Nazi Germany's war machine, demonstrating that even in wartime, there are limits to acceptable human exploitation that cannot be crossed without consequence. Where Sauckel focused on the systematic exploitation of civilian labor, our next condemned man approached criminality from the perspective of military professionalism, showing how strategic competence and operational expertise can be perverted to serve aggressive war and systematic atrocity. Alfred Jodl. Born on May 10, 1890, in Würzburg, Germany, Jodl embodied the Prussian military tradition at its most disciplined and professional. He trained at Munich's cadet school, graduating in 1910, and served with distinction in World War I, earning Iron Crosses. His military credentials were impeccable, marking him as exactly the type of professional officer that any military organization would value. He remained in the Reichswehr after the war, demonstrating commitment to military service that should have been channeled toward protecting rather than destroying civilization. His personal life reflected traditional military values. He married twice, with his second marriage occurring in 1945 as the Reich collapsed around him, suggesting a man who maintained personal relationships even in the chaos of Nazi Germany's final months. As OKW, Armed Forces High Command, Operations Chief from 1939-1945, and briefly OKW Chief in May 1945, Jodl occupied one of the most crucial positions in Nazi Germany's war machine. His strategic planning and operational coordination were essential to virtually every major German German military operation during World War II. This wasn't simply following orders, this was active, creative participation in planning aggressive warfare. Jodel's direct involvement in planning Nazi Germany's most significant aggressive actions marked him as a primary architect of the war that devastated Europe. He planned invasions including Denmark and Norway in 1940 and Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. These weren't defensive operations or responses to immediate threats. They were carefully planned aggressive wars designed to expand Nazi territory and implement ideological objectives. The personal cost of his loyalty to the Nazi regime was demonstrated when he was injured in the July 20, 1944 assassination attempt against Hitler. He was convicted on all counts despite Judge de Vabre's dissent, reflecting recognition that his military professionalism couldn't excuse his participation in criminal orders. Interestingly, he was posthumously cleared, then had that clearance revoked in 1953, showing how post-war German society struggled with evaluating military professionals who had served criminal regimes. Jodel's final moments revealed his continuing loyalty to the nation he believed he had served. His last words were, "I salute you, my eternal Germany," suggesting that even facing execution, he maintained belief in German nationalism, if not Nazi ideology specifically. This distinguished him from defendants who either showed remorse or continued expressing Nazi beliefs to the end. Alfred Jodel's execution marked the end of a military professional whose technical competence had been placed in service of criminal aggression, serving as a warning about how professional expertise without moral grounding can enable the greatest crimes against peace and humanity. While Jodl approached criminality through military strategy and operational planning, our final condemned man represents yet another pathway to evil. The lawyer turned administrator who used legal expertise to facilitate annexation, enable systematic persecution, and organize genocide with bureaucratic precision. Arthur Seyss-Inquart. Born on July 22, 1892 in Stahnen, Austria-Hungary, Seyss-Inquart's early life suggested a future in legitimate public service. He studied law in Vienna and served bravely in World War I, establishing himself as both intellectually capable and personally courageous. His political career began in mainstream Austrian politics. He served in Austrian governments from 1933–1937 before his ideological transformation toward Nazism. Seyss-Inquart's brief but crucial role in Austrian history sealed his historical infamy. As Austrian Chancellor from March 11–13, 1938, he enabled the Anschluss, the Nazi annexation of Austria. This wasn't simply a political transition, it was the elimination of Austrian independence and the beginning of Nazi persecution in Austria. After successfully facilitating Austria's absorption into Nazi Germany, Seyss-Inquart was rewarded with positions of increasing authority. He served as Reichsstatthalter from 1938–1939 and Deputy Governor General in Poland from 1939 to 1940, gaining experience in implementing Nazi policies in occupied territories. As Reichskommissar for the Netherlands from 1940–1945, Seyss-Inquart transformed from a facilitator of annexation into a direct perpetrator of genocide and systematic exploitation. His administration of the Netherlands demonstrated how Nazi occupation policies could systematically destroy both a country's economy and its Jewish population. His persecution of Dutch Jews represented one of the Holocaust's most thorough and deadly operations. He confiscated Jewish property, deported approximately 140,000 Dutch Jews with only 30,000 surviving, and set up camps like Westerbork. The survival rate under his administration was horrifyingly low, reflecting both the efficiency of his deportation system and the deadly nature of the camps to which he sent his victims. Seyss-Inquart's exploitation extended beyond the Jewish population to the general Dutch citizenry. He forced 530,000 people into labor, with 250,000 sent to Germany, implementing a system of forced labor that separated families and communities while providing slave labor for German industry. His administration was marked by systematic brutality designed to terrorize the population into submission. He authorized approximately 1,500 executions, including reprisals, creating an atmosphere of fear that enabled his other criminal policies. He oversaw operations like the Putin Raid and Rauter reprisals, showing how he used violence strategically to maintain control. Even facing execution, Seyss-Inquart maintained his ideological commitments. Arthur Seyss-Inquart's execution on October 16, 1946, marked the end of a man whose legal training and administrative skills had been used to facilitate annexation, enable genocide, and systematically exploit entire populations, demonstrating how professional competence without moral foundation can serve the darkest purposes. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.